Sometimes people ask me, what's the single most important question that you can ask about a stock before you consider investing in it? So let me just go back a step. It comes as a surprise to most people to realise that only about a third of the companies on the Australian Stock Exchange actually make a profit. And that third that make a profit, only about half of them have made a profit every year for the past 5 years. So for the very start, we want to know, is a company making a profit? We also want to know, is it making a good profit, a reasonable profit? And one way of measuring that is in terms of return on equity. And that would be the first question that I would ask about any business. What's its return on equity, and how consistent has this return been, say, over the last 5 or 6 years? So what is return on equity? Well, return on equity is the profit of the business, that's the return, divided by the equity of the business. Equity simply means assets minus liabilities. It's like the worth of the business from an accounting perspective. If you sold all the assets, paid off the liabilities, then what you'd have left is the equity. So just that, return on equity is profit divided by equity. It's like the scorecard of management. So as I said before, only about a third of the companies actually have a return on equity. For all the rest, it's either zero or negative. And for those that have a return on equity, we'd like to have a level of, say, 10% or 15% or even more, because if we're getting 10% return on equity, then we know that we have the chance of making the 10% return on that stock. In fact, the return that you actually make can't be higher than the return on equity. So unless we have a return on equity, say, of 15% per year, then we can't reasonably expect to make a profit or a return in investing on that stock of more than 15%. But the few things we have to watch out for, because return on equity is a ratio. It has a top line and a bottom line. So the top line is profit, and the bottom line, as we just said, is equity. So there's two ways that a ratio can go up. Either return can go up, that is the profit can go up, or the equity can go down. So sometimes you'll see a company boasting that its return on equity has gone up, but when you look at it closely and more closely, you see that what they've actually done is destroy its equity. So the profit has stayed the same, but the equity has gone down. So they really put themselves in a more vulnerable position. And one way a company destroys equity is simply by borrowing a lot of money and using it to buy back shares. So that actually pushes equity down, so it makes the ROE look higher. So when you're talking about return on equity, we always want to look at what's the debt level as well. So that would be my question. What's its return on equity, and has it done it with minimal amount of debt? And so to be able to do that, you need some tool to be able to scan the whole market, because it's too hard to just do it by company by company. And that's what we do through Conscious Investor, that it has a whole range of filters, but a key filter is simply just that, return on equity, looking for consistently high return on equity over the last 5 or 6 years of 10%, 15%, or preferably even better.